Sweet. YouTube says we're live. So welcome everybody back to the Citizens Firemen podcast. It has been entirely too long since we've been here before. I actually believe that Dave was the last guest that we had on, and that's been well over a year ago. So life gets in the way. We get caught up with other things, but we're back here again. A lot of firsts tonight. First time we've had multiple guests on at one time, and the first time that we've broadcasted live as well, to where our listeners can jump in, maybe throw some questions into the conversation, and get some real life feedback. So we'll go around and start introducing some of the guests, kind of where all this started at. DJ Stone, Ray McCormack, and Dave Quick. So DJ, we'll start with you if you want to give the audience a little quick introduction to yourself.
Yeah, I'll I'll start off as a lesser known guy here from suburban America. DJ Stone, 850 region of Florida. We always say that because me and my brother do a little thing locally with that training page. But anyhow, near Pensacola, Florida, right here on the coast in a place called Navarre Beach, and been in the fire service for 24 years now, all in a suburban setting, and retired recently from my city department. Went to a neighboring department just east of me called South Walton Fire District, and I'm currently their training division chief. So 2 years deep to go into days, and it's been good. It's been good.
Awesome. Ray?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Ray McCormack. I'm retired lieutenant out of the FDNY. 212 was the area code we used, and
Yeah.
been retired for a few years now. And I know DJ has had this subject near and dear to him for several years, and we've talked about it and discussed it. It's nice to be on the show to do it.
Dave?
Yeah, my name's Dave Quick. I'm a lieutenant in the city of Manchester, New Hampshire. I've got 31 years in the fire service, the last 22 here in the 603. Do some teaching at the fire academy and with my own job, and I've kind of been into hose and nozzles and attack packages for, I don't know, almost 15 years now. I represent us, the end user, the firefighter category, both in the NFPA and UL technical committees on fire hose. So I appreciate the invite because this is definitely my natural habitat, a bunch of nerds talking water.
Well, I don't think you can have a hose conversation without throwing the guy in the loop whose social media tag is literally the hose nerd. So definitely think that's one you got to have as part of the conversation. So leading back to kind of where it all started at, I know I was lucky enough to be there with Ray and DJ at FDIC this year, kind of when we actually put some of these attack packages into play. And not too long after that, DJ, you made a post on social media that really got some opinions flying out there and got the fire service really ticking and minds turning. So, kind of lead us into the direction of your thoughts on that and what the post was for you.
Okay, yeah, it goes back a few years, and Ray's been an integral part about this. I've had discussions ad nauseum with him and Dennis about this subject matter for a few years. And I will premise what I'm going to say by me as an end user in an environment where I have a minimum staffing situation of two. A lot of times, I was just being honest with myself, and moving an inch and three quarter line and flowing with minimum staff is just very difficult. So my whole process with this is innovation, and innovation, in my opinion, is looking at something and going, is there a better way to do any one particular thing? And in light of that term of innovation, there's another saying that goes along with that. Give the hardest job to the laziest guy, he'll find the fastest and easiest way to do it. So in light of that, I'm kind of fit both categories because my mind is innovative in some ways, and I'm certainly lazy. So in light of that conversation years ago, it led to, what, Ray, probably 3 years ago or so now.
Sure.
I had a conversation at one of the CFT fire conferences with several different people, Robertson, Ray, and some others, about a inch and a half, whether or not we could get 150 gallons out of an inch and a half hose. Long story short, a couple years later, I was able to arrange a bunch of people who were curious about that. Elkhart was there, Key was there, a bunch of representatives from each. Ray, along with a lot of other hitters in the business, just to flow and validate whether or not we could or could not do this. The answer is yes. However, the however part is at 150, it's a very erratic line. Um, yeah, it just wasn't good. It was good, but it wasn't good. So it wasn't like a monumental discovery. It's something that Dennis already told me is not going to work because of all the technical terms around it. And I just had to see for myself. So I did. And that was pre hen, that was pre turbo, pre a lot of things that we're doing now. So that's kind of where this whole journey started, was trying to get a smaller hand line in my hand. The reason I was curious about the 150 is because years ago, me and my brother did a lot of testing with that inch and a half. I'm going to use the quotations because it's really closer to true inch and three quarter, if you want to be honest. And it was dominating. It was freeing to use. It was exciting. I thought I was getting that flow at the time. We weren't. We just didn't meter it correctly. Fast forward to now, I still understood the value of a smaller line, and I knew I liked it, but I just knew it was not popular, nor was it really possible until really the last couple years. And some of it revolves around the science that's come out of water application, understanding water application, understanding volume and what volume does, understanding how important location is and placement. And then digging a little bit more into the FSRI studies that were telling us the results of all the burns that they did. And a lot of people saw it coming, and a lot of people are still resistant to how much water it actually takes to put out a good working fire in the context of residential. I'm not talking about, commercial spaces here. Residential fire attacks, like what Kyle likes to say, a box to box attack, right? In light of that, 130 gallons a minute, in my opinion, 120 to 130 was plenty enough water. And as I reached out and I talked to people who do it in real life, a lot more than me and a lot more than a lot of the other people that were arguing against me, told me, and definitely people from Detroit, people from DC, people from all over the Northeast, where this is still a very normal thing. They're like, hey, listen, we've been dominating with that line for years. I just didn't know what flow they were at. All those things circulate into what you read in that article. And that's kind of a summary. I'm working on something greater right now and a little bit more comprehensive. I hope to get with Dave. I mean, we are tasked to talk about this and follow up. Dave is like the nerd up level. So I sent some stuff to him to kind of really look it over and go over it with a fine tooth comb. But the short and long of the I'm going to call it an article, and here's why I'm going to call it an article. It is slated to be printed next month in Fire Engineering, which is pretty exciting. They did ask me to send it in. I sent it in, so I'm pretty pumped about that. I think two things in every fireman's journey is to be able to get something in print in that magazine and to go to FDIC are like, right? That's the pinnacle. So I'm really excited about that. But I think it sparked a lot of debate, because what I'm saying is, if I gave you something smaller, more precise, more efficient, with our understanding of water and how it works now, how to apply it better, is that risking 30 gallons, give or take, on your fire attack? Because most people are in my position, whether it's one or maybe two people stretching. That's it. That's what you got. And you got to get around two corners on a 2,000 square foot house with a couple obstacles in the yard. It's difficult. In light of that, that's kind of the perspective I wrote the article on. I wrote this little piece, and it was just something that came out on a Sunday, and I threw it out there, not expecting a whole lot of traction, but I think it sparked a lot of interesting debate. And frankly, I was refreshed by the healthiness of the debate. It wasn't a lot of just kind of digs. It was intelligent response, for and against. So I felt like I learned a ton just reading the comments on that.
And that's
particular
typically not something we get in the fire service social media world. That's a
No.
that's a miracle in itself, just to actually have firemen get on a social media post. And Ray, you know all too well, I think every post you put out there, everybody wants to know, well, where's the helmet at? We're in an open parking lot, they're demoing a nozzle, but where's the helmet and the SCBA at? Firemen love to go on social media and act like the smartest man in the world. So that's amazing and surprising at the same time that you got such positive feedback on both sides of the game from people that agreed with you and people that necessarily didn't. So I think that's something that we don't see a lot in our service.
I'll say one more thing. I think if people know me, they understand my intent and my perspective. Like I don't want to I don't want to argue. I want to debate about it, and I'm perfectly open for that. So I think maybe it was received that way because it's written in a way that is not antagonistic or saying like, "Hey, this is the final answer." It's just like, "Hey, think about it. My organization doesn't use inch and a half, right? We're in the gold package of hose and nozzles. We don't use inch and a half. We flow 160. Nor do I think my organization currently is going to consider it. However, it's still a good conversation to have. And I think this is the right time to put it out there. And I don't mind getting beat up for it, to be honest with you.
And it's something that I feel like there's not a lot of resources out there on, and that may be one of the reasons why it sparked such that debate across social media. People know, you mentioned Detroit and DC, two very large fire heavy departments that pretty well never bought into inch and three quarter at all. They've decided, I know Detroit did a lot of studies and testings of their own and decided to stick with inch and a half. But there's not a lot of articles or many things published out there. I think there was one back in Firehouse about inch and a half in like 2013 or 14 maybe, but there's not a lot of resources for people to dive into. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring y'all on today as well, just so people do have that place where they can go maybe learn a little bit more about something they've heard, but don't really have it at their fingertips. So Dave, I know that you're kind of on the opposing end to some of these thoughts. So kind of how did that lead? Where did that come from? What's just kind of lead us in your direction of your thoughts of inch and a half versus inch and three quarter?
Sure. Before I do, I'll say I had a chance to read the article that DJ's talking about, and it's a home run. He's a phenomenal writer and is very articulate in his words. So if you're a nerd, certainly make sure you check out next month's Fire Engineering. And I will also say that I give DJ a lot of credit for putting himself out here for this, because I think there's a lot of people, and sometimes myself included, that have really great conversations with folks behind the scenes, but might not be all that ready yet to really throw that out there. So that takes a lot of guts. So DJ, thanks for doing that for the betterment of the fire service, man. That's huge. For me, what I look at is I think there's two different things that are going on here. I think one is looking at target flow, and one is looking at the conduit to get the water at the end of the line. So for me, I'll start with the target flow of 130. Personally, I think it's a little bit too low. My concern is always, making sure that you get not only the right amount of water there, but having a little bit in reserve, right? I'm not the guy that's looking for you to drag around all of the extra water, but I think that there needs to be a little bit there. And I think starting at 130, if you have any kind of kinks or things like that, you could really possibly get yourself jammed up, especially in some shorter staffed environments where you don't have people to chase those out. And part of that 130 comes to me from the work that we did on the NFPA technical committee when we were looking at heat resistance of fire hose and how we wanted to report things out. And the city of Boston, after Back Bay, did some research on their own. And at that time, with their combination nozzles, they were flowing 150 gallons per minute and also using 7/8 nozzles. So what they did is they flowed water and they literally put holes in the hose line and with the flow meter on there until they reached a stream quality where they're like, no way, man, like this would be the very minimum we would want, and even as like an emergency situation. And they found that 130 GPM should be more reserved for the emergency setting, not for the attack setting to get you into a room. So knowing that and knowing that situation that happened there, I would certainly be more apt to be at that 150. From the other side of it, from the conduit side, if there's a inch and a half hose that can deliver that 150 to 160 target flow and give you good performance, and knowing that it's going to be a little bit oversized, then sure, I'm not necessarily against the inch and a half hose. So again, I think there's two different things to look at here. Is it the hose or is it the flow? And the fire departments have to, sort that out for themselves based on where they operate.
And just kind of throwing this out there too for the audience wise is understanding the difference between trade sizes and the true ID of what some of these hoses are. I know DJ, you kind of hit on it earlier, and I'm not familiar with all the specs of all the manufacturers out there, but just the inch and a half that I'm familiar with, at 50 psi, we're talking about a 172 internal ID. So we're not talking about, for say, a true inch and a half hose. We're still going to be closer to that inch and three quarter. But on the other aspect of it, our inch and three quarters be going to be closer to two. So I don't know how much of our audience is familiar with that or gets too caught up in when we say inch and a half or inch and three quarter.
Well, I would just say while the sizes may not be exactly on the dot with the reference number, you're still getting a, if you go across the line, you're still getting a difference in the outside diameter that most people can recognize by putting their hand around it. So while they have these different categories, I think it's important that an inch and a half hose is definitely going to feel different than an inch and three quarter hose. And for DJ's curiosity and work in this platform, um, you know, basically what we're looking at is hopefully advancing this line is easier, especially for low staffing. Now, low staffing is another interesting concept that low staffing where? Throughout the whole fire or low staffing just in the interior engine company crew? Because usually most places only have two, maybe three people, so that's pretty common. But inch and a half hose, I think, just makes it a little easier for you to advance. Then the next thing is, well, what's the gallonage of the inch, inch and a half? Is it close to 130? Is it low? Because that would be a very low flow for the U.S. Fire Service. And again, there may not be enough meat on the bone for that. We'd like a little extra cushion in there. So I think that's where the NFPA number of 300 kind of comes from. The two lines flowing at least 300. That's what we used in the fire attack report as our basis. So while 130 can work, you'd need something at least 170 or greater to make up that difference. So it's doable. Certainly, everything is kind of doable these days. When we did the test that DJ was referring to a couple of years back, we tested an inch and a half hose, and everybody was all excited about the pump discharge pressure, which was higher than normal, but well within the pumping capabilities of a modern fire engine. And it's
Yeah,
kind of funny how people get all tight about that number at
it's
the
true.
pump panel when, I've done plenty of demos where, look, let's just get the right pressure at the tip, and then we'll worry about that number on the rig. And if it isn't what you thought it was, so what? Just get a new number. It's not a big deal. So people get hung up on certain things. What he's trying to look at, I think, if I would say, is the awareness level of the fact that like DC and Detroit, very heavy fire communities, they use this and they love it and they wouldn't switch. And is it for someone else's future as well? And I think flows over 150 are easily attainable, depending on the equipment that's on the other end. And so I think you can have your cake and eat it too, and be a little, smaller, but still punch over your weight.
Yeah, I would say that the turbo, um, remiss not to mention that that has opened doors for this conversation to even push the inch and a half to a higher flow. That wasn't in the conversation 3 to 4 years ago. That wasn't even in existence. So that's another piece to this puzzle that if you want to push that 150 flow, it can you can do it. Like it's time and time again you see it on the internet, and they're flowed and metered lines that are pushing that. And you're absolutely right. I find it, the irony of the statement of the pump pressures. I know when I came in not that long ago, pump pressures were averaging 130 to 140 on a hand line. Then we backed it way down to 90s, maybe even less in some cases. Well, there's pros and cons to everything, isn't there? The high pressured pumped lines back in the day to get that volume we needed, the plus was the pretty much virtually no kinks. Kinks weren't even in the discussion early from my career. Now kinks are very much part of an ingrained pattern when I'm sharing hose advance with our nozzle packages that we have. That's one of the things that with elevated pump pressures, there is going to be an advantage of potentially a stiffer line. But to both of these guys' points, when you do encounter a partial kink, that's where I can understand and argue against myself. We're sacrificing the 130 top end now to potentially less. My bigger question that I don't think has been fully answered scientifically yet is is it enough? Like, is 160 to 150 overkill? If you talk to these guys in the UK, and I'm not advocating 3D fire attack, don't hear that. But, it's kind of like these other guys have been working with lesser volumes. They're going to tell you, hey, man, it's about rapid attack and location every single time. If I can get that placement and control my approach with water, that's what UK's been doing a lot longer than us, I believe, is understanding that controlled approach. Then you could start talking about lesser volumes or the risk revolving around that lesser volume. So for me, if I put a line that is 1.5 inches in size, it's 130 in flow, I'm dropping the weight significantly down, and I'm dropping the nozzle reaction down. So, and I know people are not going to like this, but if I build a system that everybody wins on my department, that's built around the weakest link, and I get it, right? Make training great again. I get it. Everything's a training issue. There's a lot of people who don't train and don't care about the job. But if I could put some in their hands where they're going to leave it open and flow in advance, because then now they can handle that nozzle reaction, and they can handle all those other peripheral things, unskilled, if you will, not as well trained. That's a huge win. But it's, I argue against myself here. I can see with a lesser volume, like, well, do you want to put that in a lesser trained person's hands? I mean, I don't know. If they can move the line better, perhaps. But I just like to enjoy the conversation that revolves around that. I think there's a place for it, and when you have a highly trained person with that piece of equipment, that's going to speed up your advance. It's just guaranteed. It's going to speed up your advance. It's almost like the debate. We went from 2.5 to 2 inch years ago in my previous department. There is zero debate on the 2 inch and 2.5. None. Like, and then now I don't know if they've released it yet, but they're talking about a turbo on a large hand line. Dude, that fixes the whippiness. Like, it's a dominator. But here's the deal: you're not sacrificing GPM. However, we have dropped from 260 to 240 in the last year or two on the 2.5, and I'm going, well, 130, 160. It's the same conversation, a little bit lesser. So, I don't know. It could produce good debates in both directions, right? On the big line or the small line. I just think it's more precise, and it could move a little quicker to the seed, but it comes with risk.
And I mean, I can attest for that myself. I mean, I came into the fire service after 1.5 inches was pretty well killed and dead in the majority of the country. 1.75 inches was all I ever really knew coming in, going through different trainings, and now through like 3 different academies. But I had the opportunity it was actually whenever we did our podcast last, Dave, because I know I was leaving the day after that to go, went up and spent the day with some great people from Mercedes Textiles up in Nashville. And that was the first time I'd ever put 1.5 inches in my hand. And just doing some evolutions, flowing and moving through a training building. The first thing that I thought whenever I grabbed it was kind of hitting back to what Ray thought. I was like, wow, in a gloved hand, I can wrap my hand entirely around this hose line. And coming from flowing 1.75 inches for my entire career before then, once we started doing evolutions, the speed was there off the rip. And the guys that we were flowing with were obviously fire service rock stars, but still, the amount of time that it took to get that line into play and how fast it was moving through the building was something that I'd never seen before.
I guess my question to DJ would be, is it enough that you switch to a smaller hand line and maybe just keep the flow as much as you can? Or do you prefer to have both, a low flow, small hand line package?
So again, it's interesting. Things have changed in the last couple of years. I don't know if it's a moot argument, but we can now achieve 150 reasonably. Problem is you're not going to go much past about 200 feet because the pump pressures do get into exceeding 150 range, at least in the little bit of experimentation I've done with it recently, trying to get beyond 200 feet. But I don't know, other people would know a lot more about that than I would. But no, I mean, you can achieve both now. Absolutely. If you didn't have to drop it, yeah, that's the best case scenario, is to take a little bit more GPM. At the 150 though, you're going to get a little bit more nozzle reaction, I believe, on that. A little bit more pushback. But to your point, Tyler, there is a mental thing around control. Like if you feel like you have better control, you're going to have better control, and I think that's what the 1.5 inch produces, or frankly the true 1 3/4 inch. No one's really talking about that. I mean, that is an option as well. That kind of blows this whole debate out of the water, and it's not a whole lot different. It's just not used. True 1 3/4 really, to my knowledge, not very well used around the country. 1.5 inch sounds better. But yeah, I think there's something mentally around that ability to control and get your whole hand around the hose. I felt the same way when I messed with it.
So, man, I've been taking a lot of notes over here. I love this. This is such a great conversation. So, I guess I'll start with what you just talked about, DJ. That was going to be my next thing. I would love to have those numbers where we're putting a true 1 3/4 up against an 1.5 inch to achieve the 150 flow. In order to get that 150 flow realistically, you need to be in the high 1.6s to the low 1.7s. There's a manufacturer that's making a premium 1.5 inch right now that only charges to 1.55, and they're really struggling to get 150 out of it because the pump discharge pressure at 200 feet is like 245 pounds, which you can run at that, but they still can't get the flow. There's another manufacturer that's at 166. I think they're having some pretty good success. And then the one that seems to be having the most success on the 1.5 inch front is 1.72. So again, taking those numbers in the 1.5 inch charged internal diameter, and comparing those to a truer 1 3/4 inch, I think people would be surprised at how little difference there is both in charged internal diameter weight and also charged outside diameter. Now, is there a difference? There certainly is, which leads me also to, when you break that down and we're comparing the hose itself and the weight of the hose and moving it, let's have the conversation about what part of the hose is moving forward. So yes, and I've seen manufacturers in their marketing do this for the last few years. Well, my hose weighs 200 pounds less over 200 feet. That's really great, but the majority of the fire service moves charge hand lines about 50 feet, maybe 75 or 100 if you're in a commercial setting, but it's not all moving. And then if you look at where you operate and you start to figure out where you drop into the building and how far you're really going, you may only have to look at the weight difference just in the first 25 feet of hose, and that's it. So, you have to really do that comparison. As far as the pump discharge pressure goes, I know there's this whole phenomenon out there. People like to reference the NFPA. My pump's most efficient at 150 psi, which is 100% accurate, but that's a draft. So that's not when it's pumping off, being fed from another source, or when it's being pumped from a hydrant. The pump actually becomes more efficient when it's being fed. And if it's coming off of tank water, the only limiting factor is the tank to pump pipe size, which is generally about 3 inches, and you have to flow a minimum of 500 gallons per minute, I believe. I don't know those well enough, but I know it can easily support 150 or even up to 300 gallons per minute off of your tank. So, as far as people getting all bent out of shape about the pump discharge pressure, they're designed to pump at 250, man. So, you can do this if this is what you want to do. The final piece that I want to talk about as far as the design goes, and looking at the 1.5 inch versus the 1 3/4 inch, is the hose's ability to support the nozzle. So you're right, with a turbo, it will support the hose, right? The hose is, with the turbo, the 1.5 inch hose can support the weight of the nozzle. Now, if you take that turbo out, it becomes a whole different ball game. But let's talk about why that works, right? There's 3 components when you design an attack package, in where the hose has to have characteristics to support the weight of the nozzle. Otherwise, you're going to get whip, you're going to get knuckling, you're going to get all the things that folks don't like. Number 1 is the construction and the weave. So you've got to have a lot of material on a good material on the yarn that's packed tight and interlocked. And you need to have some kind of waterway liner that's a little bit thicker. That helps you to lead to being able to support the nozzle. The second piece is the charged column of water. The reason why 2.5 is harder to bend than a smaller diameter hose is because it has more mass, it has more water in there. And even with the line flowing and the water having an outlet, you can't compress water. So, it's hard to move that thing around. The third piece, and this is where the turbo comes in, is base nozzle pressure. So if I go from a base nozzle pressure of 50 up to 75, say for the turbo, of course it's going to be better. So if I take what's the largest largest 1.5 hose on the market right now, I have a premium hose that has a lot of threads in the yarn. It has a good adhesion of the waterway to the inner jacket. I make it the larger of the waterways when it's charged, and I add an extra 25 pounds of pressure in. It works fine. But the only way this is going to work for most fire departments is if they evaluate each one of their hose lines, and then on top of that, look at the nozzles themselves and see not only how much they weigh, but how that weight is distributed. If it's a heavy bump or a combination tip, no matter what you do, that thing is going to flop down at the end because that 1.5 hose is so small charge. So to wrap it up, it may be better to go to that smaller 1.75 than it is to be in that 1.5 for all of those other trade-offs that you get.
Yes, pushing the 150 GPM rate. The 1.5 starts to shine when you drop the volume. And that was a big part of the debate. It's like, well, okay, so we found that the 166 that we're using by key and doing this testing, once we drop that GPM down to that 130, 120 range, man, that stuff it shined. It was great. With a just normal Elkhart 50 PSI, nozzle on the end. But you're right, there was a little bit of that weight. And it's like anything else. The fire service wants a lot of black and white answers, but there really isn't any. Like we like, I want it this way or that way. Well, I like to say we paint in grayscale. That's where we got to get good. And this is a kind of another grayscale of sorts, right? Like there's no direct answer, because for one thing that's profitable, you're going to find something that's not. And that's the trade-off piece, I suppose. Yeah, and when I talked about weights in this article, I talk about the 100-foot range, because I agree with you. The weight I'm considering is that first 100. Where you're right, most occupancies are 50 feet in. Where I work now, it's not uncommon to be beyond that because they're huge homes. So I just suggest in the weight debate for the article, it was like, yeah, at 100 feet. So if I'm shaving off, even if it's 50 pounds lighter per 100 feet, that's a pretty big win. 25 pounds, maybe not. 50, we're getting into the win category for the end user as far as mobility, combined with their ability to like grab the thing and move it around, easier. That was some of the compelling stuff to me, and I think that's what resonates with a lot of people is that idea. But you're right, it gets deep real quick on your understanding of putting the right package together, because I guess it's a little irresponsible putting stuff out there without all the facts. But like anything else, you could get yourself jammed up if it's not assembled correctly with pairing with the right nozzles, etc. No doubt about it. Or trying to overpump the 1.5 can be pretty dangerous.
You mentioned, DJ, you mentioned that training for people that, you wanted to train people up and you want them to be good with the nozzle. And obviously that should be the objective of every fire department. How much better are they going to be if they use an 1.5 flowing, we'll just say at least 150, not super low, but at least 150 gallons versus another line flowing, 10 gallons more? That's not going to be much of a difference. I think there has to be, some kind of difference, but what is stopping people from being good with a 60 pounds of nozzle reaction, needing to get below that? Like,
Well,
how do you, calculate that?
well, in theory, and I say theory because I'm not out here. I've done testing. Nozzle reaction is kind of a mysterious thing in a lot of cases, because me and my brother did stuff 10 years ago, and we used a fish scale to measure a nozzle reaction. when we were doing this
Yeah, I
attack
remember.
package thing. You remember that, Ray, in Orlando when we did the attack package stuff. It was literally a fish scale, and that's how we were measuring that nozzle reaction. And the reason we went from 180 down to 160 years ago was because nozzle reaction. So I think nozzle reaction is a big part of performance in people's hands. So when you go from 60 pounds, let's say, to the 40 pound, does 20 pounds make a difference when someone is moving athletically speaking? And I think whether you're moving something around, if you don't have the force pushing back in you and it's that there's a little less, perhaps people's ability to maneuver it gets better. But at the end of the day, I mean, right, who's training them? Who's showing them? What best practices are they using? Are they doing? I'd like to say in 2025, if people come into the fire service ignorant, your head's in the sand. Like, we have nozzlemen coming into the job, nozzle women, firefighters, coming into the job way more educated because they already see all the good stuff out there on what they should and shouldn't be doing, right? But there is still a huge swath of the fire service that is in their insulated box. They don't know that. So that's kind of a hard question to answer, but I would just look back to the nozzle reaction, that maybe a little less nozzle reaction and that psychological feel of control might help the end user to broadcast that water where it needs to go appropriately. Maybe a little bit better, but I don't know that to be a guarantee.
Do you think nozzle movement would change at all with a lower gallonage flow? Would it have to be more rapid?
Um,
Would it be more
well,
rapid because you have less nozzle
yeah,
reaction?
yeah. I mean, I think you would see that intuitively, but yeah, you got to break the stream up, right? You
Sometimes.
got to, yeah, you got to. I mean, depending on the nozzle that you're using, bladed or not, that's also another thing that is new to the discussion. The whole point of us broadcasting water, right, is because we're backing up UL. We're coating surfaces. We're trying to get that water in the atmosphere to contract the gas and do the work. So um, I know there's too fast of nozzle movement can be detrimental, with air entrainment and that. Um, so I think that would be a part of it, though. Yeah, I think you would definitely see more of an erratic movement, possibly,
Well,
with people.
I would just say this: you're never going to get um, bad, high level, super high level of air entrainment by moving around a single nozzle. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
whether it's a straight stream or a solid stream, you just can't physically reach those numbers, no matter how fast you whip that nozzle around.
Yeah,
It,
yeah, I would
as they
agree with
say, it's
that.
all good.
Yeah. So,
Was that something, so just kind of looking back into some research that I put into some of this conversation, and not something that I found on it, but something I know actually I think Ray, you was a part of it. But the FSRI study on water mapping, where the 130 range was actually one of the things that was tested with the smooth bores, and they all had generally the same distribution, just obviously a little bit difference in the gallonage as opposed to 130 being on the lower end, all the way up to the 180 on the higher end of things. So is that something that kind of came into play as some of those studies of how quickly that nozzle was being worked, or was it across the board gallonage wise worked in a pretty similar pattern and speed?
Yeah, I mean, they moved, they had a steady flow, and then they manipulated the nozzle, and they were trying to get it at a quick pace, about like a one circular movement per second. And the numbers they came up with just never put it in a bad way. It's never excessive air entrainment when you're using a solid or straight stream at a rapid movement. You're moving more air, but it's not a problem for the nozzle team. It just makes you tired, that's all.
Tyler, I've got something I'd like to bring up.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I love about talking to these guys is it's very thought provoking. So what I'm going to ask wasn't something that I've thought about in the past with all the discussions that we've had around this. Looking at fire hose and the fact that it's in most fire departments is a minimum of a 10-year purchase, if not longer. if fire departments were to drop back, say, into the inch and a half, even if it was a smaller inch and a half hose that could deliver the 130, based on the way and the trends that we're seeing, homes being built, interior furnishings, furniture, and the different contents that are in there, the trend at least has been that these materials are giving off more heat and they are growing at a faster rate. Have you given any consideration to the future? Like in 5 years from now, will we find out that, we really do need that 160 or maybe even a little bit more, where a fire department who's already in a truer ID hose might be able to get and push 175 or 180 out of that hose, if not a little bit more?
I think that's another great question that comes into play on all of it, and also goes back to, is there going to be a difference between the gallonage that's going to make or break us, or is it going to be the placement and how that line's getting there? But I could definitely see where, as bad as we want to admit it, that we're not going to take any steps backwards in society that are going to help the fire service when it comes to extinguishment efforts, when it comes to interior furnishings or building construction. So it's definitely something to throw out there into the mix, because I don't know many departments that can afford to go outfit every rig they have today with a new type of hose, then turn around 3-4 years later because an attack package isn't working out for them and run it all back again.
Well, I mean, what I would ask you guys that are a bit more intimately involved with FSRI, the questions I have is, so when we say modern furnishings, I think we could reach back probably in the last 30 to 40 years. I mean, I know some stuff is more oil based now and it is burning quicker. However, at what at what volume and distribution are we controlling the environment? And when I say control, I don't mean putting it out, right? Hence why the flow and move as a dominant forefront, even FSRI is saying like this is the way, because the water out of the nozzle, right, is encountering that atmosphere where it's not putting it out, is putting a pause by eliminating part of that chain reaction. At least on my dumbed down version of thought through this. And I go, well, how much water does it take to prevent the combustion rate from happening and controlling? To some extent, the UK, again, not to advocate, but they've been doing the whole pulsing control and approach thing. Like a place like Paris has been going to fires for a minute, right? London, they've been doing it for a while. How does it work? I know there's a lot more to it that I'm ignorant about, but I think there's something to that environmental control on approach. I even put something up the other day on a video that Andy put out, and I put something to the fact of the control on the approach. So I would like to know, and maybe I just don't know where to look on the studies that are speaking to that. Okay, so what volume are we entering, and what is preventing that progression as we move from box to box into location? And the biggest fear is the unknown. When you go into a fully charged home and you really don't have your location completely mapped out, then you're really leaning back to that volume. But again, if we could determine, okay, so if you're flowing at a minimum this up to a threshold of that, whatever those numbers are, that might allow the volume to drop. I don't know that we have those answers. I don't have those answers.
Well, in Europe, they have a different approach to the approach. They do gas cooling. We do surface cooling. And that was in the fire attack study. So there's a couple of other things, like you talked about the build environment. The build environment there is traditionally different than here. As almost every home there, not every, but has a door. The kitchen has a door. So this provides isolation or rapid isolation potential. American homes have a lot of things in them. People had a lot of stuff years ago too, a lot of plastics and everything. So the plastic thing is not new, but we were over there and they did one approach using a traditional method of the gas cooling, and they did one with a flow cooling. And the members who were in there remarked how much better it was with the flowing concept. So I think our method is valid. and has been
Yeah.
validated. And, creating that cocoon of safety for the nozzle team is very important. So opening up, like it used to be, don't open up on smoke. Well, that rule doesn't apply anymore. So who knows what future things are going to happen? Like you say, you have larger homes that you go to, and I'd rather err on the side of more than less, because, and I know people will say, well, we've been using this line at a lower flow for years, not a problem. Yes, but have you ever tried? Maybe the same fire would go out quicker and and be more efficient if you had a higher flow. Because we all know that, and this, I shouldn't say we all know. I'll just give you one example. We talked about this in the study one time. So the back of several townhouses are going. Do you bring an inch and three quarter back there, or do you bring a 2.5 back there? So some people said, well, if I do a 2.5, I'm going to use a lot of water. In reality, you might use more water with the inch and three quarter than you would with the 2.5. So even though you brought a bigger line back there, if it takes care of the fire faster, you may actually use less water. Again, I don't know why we're so fixated on how much water we're going to use, because we all carry around plenty of water with us. So it's not really a problem until the fire gets to be out of the dimensions of what we've brought to the scene, which most times it does not.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Dennis talked about their change in Oakland, similar to what you're saying. Like they found for him, I guess, in their experiences there, fires went out quicker when they transitioned to the inch and three quarter higher flow from the inch and a half, because they were traditionally an inch and a half department. So
Yeah, that was Jay Camella investigated that fatal fire they had. They
yeah,
they changed their hose and nozzle package, I believe. Yeah.
yeah,
I think a lot of this can come back to it's not a one fix all. I mean, obviously,
mm-mm.
we're still departments, not even take the entire country, just take the East Coast because everybody knows we're the best on this side of the country, anyways. Uh, but take the different types of attack packages and the different hose sizes and combinations that we have just in our own general areas. It's going to be broad. It's going to be super broad range of different things you're going to come up with. But just coming from some of the departments that I've got to work really intimately with across Southeast United States in the volunteer aspect specifically, is they're not even meeting the marks of, say, this 150 to 160 range today. They
Right,
never have.
right,
I'm going to departments that are running, and they're running for, say, a True ID inch and three quarter hose with a selectable gallonage combination nozzle on it that stays set on 95 GPMs
yep,
and never gets charged to more than 100 psi off the truck, because that's all their education ever told them was whenever they learned how to drive the truck and got checked off the pump, they said 50, 80, and 100 is all you have to worry about. So these people aren't even flowing 100 GPMs today. By the time they account in to say that their bread and butter line is going to be somewhere around 200 foot. So if we were to take an attack package like what the conversation's been based around tonight and put that into their hands with some bit of education behind it and correcting some pump, I'm not going to say mistakes, but misunderstandings and uneducation, just ignorance. You don't know what you don't know. Was we could definitely see an improvement in some areas,
mm-hmm.
but where we may take it and put it in Dave's department or take it and put it in your own department, DJ, and it not work for them.
Yeah.
It's all going to come down to what's your operational reality. What do you deal with every day whenever you go out onto the streets?
I would agree, and then being at understanding it enough to know whether to drop below that. It's interesting you mentioned the 95 gallons a minute. My first hand line on the trucks I worked on was 95 gallons a minute. It was the foam line. Always pull the foam line. They could never get more than 95 gallons a minute. And we made some jobs with that line, and the fire went out. And I think a lot of times that may breed some forms of complacency, right? That it's always worked that way, but I don't know, man. I think there's room for conversation, and I would like to fast forward in 5 years and see where we're at on this tests and studies with volume on attack. You know, we saw an inkling of what could be interpreted as less water, but it's also just a snapshot, isn't it? The last few studies where they were showing how many gallons it took plus overhaul, et cetera, to put a house out. But it is compelling information that you have to consider and go, okay, well, I got 3 or 4 rooms going on a ranch home. Like, is 160 overkill? I don't know. We can't answer that question directly for people. But in a minimum staff situation, if you can get that line moved faster with less people, that's going to be a huge win. And if people leave the nozzle, even if it's a little bit open, a little bit longer, but they can handle and work that nozzle, also huge win. So for me, the two things that are the weight of the working end and the nozzle reaction are two big gains on the GPM drop. But all that is debatable, right? But I think that's something you have to think about when you're, you know, especially in the volunteer sector, when you really don't know what you have sometimes coming out to stretch a line. You know, it's the majority of the fire service.
And some of the nozzle aspect of it, kind of what we hit on earlier of the inch and a half being able to support 150. And I know we mentioned with some newer technologies that we weren't used to before that we can achieve that now, even though we may have some pump discharge pressures that make people freak out a little bit, like Dave said. But I know some of that comes from the nozzle that I'm familiar with would happen to be the line that Ray you invented. It was your child that you came up with. So Ray, can you talk a little bit about the force line and where you could see that coming in to play with some of these attack packages?
Yeah, well, certainly it was actually designed for 1 3/4 hose. The flow of 175 was supposed to be like an easy reference to 1 3/4 hose. In other words, no, uh, lose the idea of having two different flows for one size hose, and that's kind of where I started from. But at FDIC, we filmed some videos there, and we were using 100, and we were flowing 175 out of the 1.5 inch, and it was awesome. Everybody loved it. So that kind of tells us you can have a decent flow in a smaller package. The and good nozzle reaction too. That is very important. Having a low nozzle reaction number, certainly. It is the thing most firefighters fight against, is nozzle reaction. And the last thing you want from a firefighter is having a gate down on the nozzle, you know, as a habit, because of the fact that they're, having difficulty. Because remember, the nozzle team has to negotiate a lot of hazards inside a building, not just the pull weight of the hose. It's the nozzle reaction,
Right.
it's the obstacles, it's the heat, the fatigue. There's a lot of things that they're battling against. So obviously, the fire service looking to lower nozzle reaction, lower, you know, the weight, and allow for good distribution of the pattern. It's all important stuff, and we are moving in that direction. We really are. And these conversations are awesome because even if we don't come to a solution, which is not what we're here for anyway, it's the debate of ideas that matters. It's, as we all know, the debate of ideas and the ability to do that is what everybody in the fire service should be shooting for, because this is how you come up with stuff. You have great conversations, you learn things, you share ideas, and we should never be like so crazy about what we're doing that we don't have an ear to listen to what somebody else has to say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll hop over to YouTube real quick. I just went and checked some of the comments, and there's a question on here I want to throw at you guys. So, got a question a while back from Kyle that says, "What's your thoughts on a 1 inch waterway shutoff for 1.5 inch hose lines? Plenty of shutoff manufacturers make shutoffs with 1 inch waterways that are generally lighter than a 1 3/8 waterway shutoff. The smaller ID shutoff would also add back pressure similarly to a turbo."
I had spoken with one of the major hose manufacturers about that, and they said that the water going through there is kind of turbulent and doesn't produce a great stream at those upper flows through a solid bore nozzle or something like that. So they were very hesitant. It's really designed for, I think it was like less than 125, they were saying. I had asked that question. That's a great question from the audience.
Can I say something kind of off topic, but sort of going along the same lines? Actually, I actually wrote some stuff about this after kind of reading something related about stream, like straight streams. Um, we talk sometimes. The fire service likes to talk about stream, like, "Hey man, it doesn't look right. It doesn't look this. It doesn't look that." A lot of debate I know when I was trialing out the hen at my organization was the stream reach. Like, guys didn't like the stream reach was a thing, and the stream doesn't look a certain way. And I go, well, if you're getting volume, two things. If you're getting volume and it's compact, are we really worried about if it looks a little rough or turbulent or broken up at the end of the day? And if it's reaching anywhere from 30 to 40 feet, that's a pretty effective stream reach, right? Not breakover, like where you still got to punch. Um, do you think we are kind of getting into the splitting hairs? Well, this whole conversation is splitting hairs, but in that particular lane, though, right? Like where people are like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like the way that stream looks. When's the last time you saw what the stream looked like in a working fire?
Yeah, yeah.
I've never seen it in a
Well,
working
I guess
fire,
we
right?
all fall into that thing of, you want it to look a certain way. I get the aesthetic of it. Whether it has functionality or not, probably not. A stream that's a little choppy is not going to be a big deal. Um, so, and a laser beam, is a laser beam necessary if your ceiling is 10 feet away? No, uh, you know, it's not. But people like what they like, and sometimes people just want to find something that the opposite of what's there. Who knows?
Absolutely. And that's something that I've ran into as well, just out doing demos and things like that, especially once you start throwing other appliances. I know we've talked about the turbo. Once you throw something like that into a line where does have that little crossed web in it and might ever so slightly disrupt that stream, and somebody that's been running a 7th, 8th tip smoothbore their entire career is going to look at it and say, well, that's not the same stream that I've got coming off of my line right now. But then we put it inside of a building and they actually see that, as you said, DJ, I don't need 40 to 50 foot of stream. As long as I've got that, I would say, just in my experience, anywhere from 10 to 20 foot where I've still got enough velocity to have a punch behind it before that breakover, we're going to be just fine. It's going to work every time.
I mean, I suppose unless you're talking about the jam hit, that's another interesting nuanced debate that it's kind of like, okay, again, you're in a maxed out approach down a hallway and zero visibility. I can't typically see the door jam a lot of times. Now, I'm not stretching lines every day anymore, but I'm just saying, and my limited experience is that those weren't things that were like momentarily, it was a consideration. We were probably not even really trying to hit a jam and getting a stream into the room on our approach, because I don't really come from a flow and move department as much as a hit and move department. That is our historical context. We're going to open, we're going to work, we're going to shut it down. And you know what? Don't tell anybody. We're going to get on our feet and we're going to advance the hose to the fire room. And then I'm going to drop back down on my knees and work the nozzle again. Right? That's the reality of what we did my whole career. So the jam hit thing too, people want to kind of debate that. And I'm like, it's kind of like a
Well, I'm not sure what they want to
shape.
debate, except for the fact that it's very difficult to do. It's
Yes.
it's easy
That's
to
what I'm
do
saying.
inside the UL water mapping prop, and that's kind of
Right.
where it came from. And concentrating on the jam edge to get early water and to break up your stream, because when you hit it with a solid stream, it kind of, it goes like that. It just goes vertical on you, and but once you come off that, you go back to that solid pipe. That's all you get out of it. So it's going to be momentary. It'll help you a little bit if it hits that, but to try and think you're going to aim for that, I don't think so.
Probably the place where you can benefit the most from it is if you have, say, a center stairwell cape, something with a bedroom right off the side, because you're going to be able to get halfway up the stairs, you usually have a little bit of visibility down at that floor level. So you get an idea of where the jam is. So you can get yourself right in position then at the opposite side. But I agree with you. It's probably better used there or more effectively used there because you can see a little better than those other conditions you were talking about.
You know, it's funny. I did that a couple of years ago. Oh, it was, probably more than 5 years ago, when the engine class at FDIC, and I did a jam hit from outside, and I filmed the whole thing. And it's interesting, certainly, but are you going to be you're going to go down a hallway totally intent on doing that? I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But it's good to know what it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, sidebar. I've just heard interesting debate on that, in the past, and so.
But what's the debate though? Like not to do it or to do it, or what does it
Well,
do?
just kind of like, stream's ability to rebound and get into a space, right? Like
Yeah.
ability to get the volume in there before you get in there. And it's like, again, I don't know anyone that's intentionally doing that unless, like what you say, Dave, you kind of see the environment and you can kind of identify your target. A lot of times it's going to be a sweeping motion where the line is going to pass the doorway and throw a little bit into that perhaps, or maybe rebound just a little bit. And then furthermore, if you're in a situation where you have to use a technique to rebound to get into that room because it's that bad, you know what I'm saying? Like the conditions, I don't know, maybe you guys should be thinking about backing back to an area of refuge or something. And it's not like a ton of debate. I wouldn't say it's ever a debate. It's just people, I just see every now and then on social media kind of people speaking to the jam hit. And I'm like, well, I don't know if it's really relevant
I mean, like I get like
necessarily.
if you tried to aim your line on the opposite wall as you were going down the hallway, that was just something you wanted to do. Obviously, you'd hit the frame, the closest part of the frame to you, and then you would hit a void space, and that's the open door. Then you would hit the far jam, which kind of, unless you in that void space, your stream's going to retain its original shape. It's only going to change shape when it hits the jam. And if that's something that you're interested in, replicating, fine. Yeah, it goes vertical and covers a distance, and it kind of travels in the same direction. But you may get half of that room out. That's true,
Yeah.
or a portion of it at least.
I got one more question from the live feed on kind of the inch and a half stuff, and then after that, since we've already surpassed an hour, Ray, I want to revolve back to one of the other things that you had sent that you wanted to talk about.
Oh
So
no,
the
that's all right.
question,
Just stay on this. I didn't. No, don't worry about that.
okay. So
I
the
want to know now.
question
No.
is what kind of training or flow benchmarks would really convince crews the inch and a half can handle today's fire environment?
Dave?
I don't know. That actually leads into a question that I've been sitting here wanting to ask you. I guess it ties in. So let's go down this hole before we got to wrap up. I think that it's twofold. I think number one, you're going to have to show them what they're currently using now and then put them in whatever it is that you think is going to be the best for what your department operates at. So if we go down that road, hey, right now we're in a let's just make it up. We'll go 160 through, sort of not the largest inch and 3/4 hose, but one that's kind of oversized. Okay, we're not going to talk a 188. Let's go with whatever, a 178, a 181, something in that realm, right? And they're flowing 160 gallons per minute. So I think you put that in their hand, you move them forward, you do the thing inside of a building, obviously not a parking lot, and let them work it. And then you put the 130 on the inch and a half, and I mean, we already know what's going to happen. So I think convincing them from a practical standpoint is going to be ridiculously easy. It's no different than what DJ was talking about, going from the 2.5 down to a 2.25 or a 2 inch flowing the same water. Folks love it. They should love it. It is a big difference. From the other side of it, I think that it's going to require a little bit more data. I think it's hard to look at the experiences of firefighters that sit on the NFPA technical committee, regardless of what people think about it. If you look at the 1710 standard, there's a lot of home run jam up guys that go to work there, right? So that their experience and their knowledge base says, you know what, that 300 combined is great. So now what happens? You do the study through FSRI, who is the most notable testing agency, that said, you know what, we tested 160, we've had good luck with it, and the numbers bear fruit. Awesome. And now you have folks that have gone to that package that are operating on a daily basis in a 160 with a truer ID 1.75 inch, and they like it. So I think without having some kind of outside agency that can quantify what 130 looks like, and then go out and run those numbers of one kink versus no kinks versus two kinks, like you can with the other stuff, we already know what that looks like. I think it's going to be hard to convince folks to go that low on a holistic platform. I think it's going to come down to folks like a Detroit or a Washington or some other folks that say, no, this is exactly what I need for what I have, and we think we're going to be successful.
And to answer the question further, I think places like Detroit and DC, they've done enough reps with even lower volume with success that they're willing. That's not a risk to them because they know the benefit. But to Dave's point, it's not really been quantified. I mean, what we're talking about on a lower volume attack really hasn't been quantified. And maybe the next step is to actually do a couple of those kink tests. And I would even suggest that with some of the better made hose, it might even be more difficult when you're pumping it, you're exceeding 150 pump pressure to put a kink in the line. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's going to be really hard to jam a kink into that line because of the rigidity of what it's being pumped at. Now, when you throw a device such as the turbo on it, now you're back pressuring to the pump, making it even more difficult to throw a kink. So if you're looking at pros and cons, I think that's a big pro because kinks equate to disciplined firefighters not passing them on the fire ground. If you don't have a whole lot of those firefighters and a whole lot of disciplined firefighters looking for that in the heat of the moment to make sure as they're moving to the search, they're pulling line with them and they're clearing kinks, it might be a win for you. I know that's one of the big selling points for the turbo, which, I can't disagree with it. It helps with kinks. It's a minimum staffed advantage, so, but I agree with Dave. I don't think there's a real answer right now for that out there as far as like resting on a certain volume amount, but maybe in the future they'll look at it. Maybe not.
Well, it was definitely considered during the fire attack study, and I would say that they felt that they could have gone lower in gallonage for fire attack. They looked at the numbers. What we're talking about being low would be kind of high in Europe.
Right.
That's kind of on the high side. So, it's all relative. But I truly believe, and I've talked to both of you about this, if they lowered the number from 300 to say 270 or 275, and there was a validated reason to do that, I think that might green light more people to do it.
Yeah.
But
yep.
As it stands right now, I'm not so sure that's going to happen. But again, we have to look at housing stock. A lot of places that are suburban have delayed response. They have big, large homes with larger open spaces. And we just don't want to we just want to make sure that whatever we're giving these people as a decent flow remains decent in the worst case scenarios, not the easy ones, While it may be easier to advance this line and control it, is it going to be sufficient to knock down the heat release rate of a large room in a rapid fashion? That's really the ultimate thing, because speed of advance may slow a little bit, but your protection level, we can't mess that up. That's a big one. So I love the idea of it. I'm not against it necessarily. I don't feel like I'm against it, but because it would probably make most fires go out quicker, to be honest. Because like you say, it's a lighter package to advance down the hallway, and if you're flowing, you could probably flow and move a lot easier with it. So there are some advantages, but I'd like to see us being a good flow with it. I'd love to see us have a nice rigid hose line and flow equivalent to or greater than what people are currently doing. That's really how you maximize it. I wouldn't necessarily try and go down necessarily. I'd say let's continue where we are or further up.
Well, I mean, in no way
You're still
did Ray
getting the
set
hose.
this
You're not getting
up.
the flow.
No, in no way
You
did.
want the hose or do you want the flow?
Right. Well, what's interesting is the development of that. And it sounds like an ad, man. I'm not trying to. I don't work for Hen, but it is a compelling development with the integrated backflow device. And to your point, whether it's purchased and put on your current package, that's something to look at, right? To look at that particular piece of equipment, allowing us to get smaller hand lines to a larger flow. But I agree with you, the NFPA thing, because Chiefs, especially Chiefs, love to lean on NFPA when it comes to equipment and love to ignore it when it comes to staffing. So, you know, I agree with you though. That is kind of the industry standard, and until they entertain dropping that, most people aren't gonna. They're gonna see it as a liability. And I get it.
So since I seem to be the naysayer of the group, or labeled that early on by Tyler, I'm going to go down that. I'm going to own that and go down that road. And I'll start with this. I'm a huge fan of the Hen products. I am completely independent when it comes to nozzles because I'm a hose guy, right? The hose has to perform well with whatever nozzle the fire department chooses. But I think one of the things that, as a fire chief, so now I'm going to play the other side, DJ. That's all. As a fire chief, you want me to buy and spend all this money on a premium hose line, and now you want me to add this additional piece of equipment on there. I think personally that a hose, when it's developed, should be able to support that package without additional appliances. From a hose, let me say, from a hose performance standpoint, obviously the turbo was designed also in mind with the pressure governor. So, right, there's a lot of pieces that come into play with that. But I don't know. I kind of, maybe I'm a purist. I'd like to think that hose manufacturers can develop something in conjunction and collaborate with nozzle manufacturers to make sure that the two will work well together and balance, because that's what needs to happen.
Well, they have.
Yeah, I think there's some partnerships here.
I
For
would say
sure.
they have already. The hoses they make are pretty good. Their premiums are very good. But this the products you're talking about were really designed to aid the firefighter with the lower nozzle reaction and higher flow. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Tyler, if we had time for one more thing, I'd like to throw it out there. I think that we can be somewhat quick, but I think it really ties the whole conversation together.
Absolutely. Let's hit it, and then after that, we'll kind of do a little conclusion wrap up for everybody.
So let's go through the scenario that says, hey, we're going to go with 130. Okay, just for argument's sake, we're going to say 130. I guess so. It's a twofold question. Number one, where do you see that 130 being used as far as visual volume of fire, right? Because we're not having guys show up and say length times width divided by 3 for the largest compartment. So I pull up, what kind of building and like what kind of fire do I see on arrival that makes me go, hey, you know what? That's a 130 all day long with 1.5 inches. My next question then would be, what is your next option? And then how many options after that do you think would be realistic for the American Fire Service, right? And I think we would all agree right now you're looking at 150 to 185 as the small diameter attack package. A medium diameter attack package is somewhere 240 to maybe 300 or 3.25. And then the large is going to be that 3-inch hose with a portable monitor or a deck gun, right? So it makes it sort of expandable, as Brian Brush talks about. And it also works well into things with like Jay Bonifield and Aaron Fields talking about the rule of 3 based off of Gary Klein's work. So I'm interested again, what does it look like as far as how much volume of fire does 130 put out? And then what are my next options as I grow based on, fire involvement?
So for me, and you guys are going to know the more particulars about the studies, but as I understand it, it was based off a ranch style home, a lot of the water usage in residential fire studies, and based off of 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms, etc. When I think of this, I think of the context, and I know that across the nation there is hundreds of different style of home, but I'm thinking strictly residential. I'm thinking strictly the, you know, I would say the 2 to 5,000 square foot range, maybe even larger. So for me, coming from an area where I'm at now, it's not uncommon to see 10 to 15,000 square foot houses. But here's the thing about fire attack and large residential structures is the whole place is not burning. It's most typically always in these occupancies, kept to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 rooms. So to answer your question plainly, just like now, if I saw a ranch home, 2,500 square feet with fire showing from 4 windows on the front, that's not a 2.5 fire. 5 windows, that's not a 2.5 fire. We're talking about box extinguishment. So in light of that, I would feel plenty confident in 3 or 4 windows of fire showing. Granted, I know it's a very broad statement, and I know that's very debatable, and I'm envisioning a structure in my mind that you can't see right now. But I would say that for your typical home, whether it's modern, whether it's not, I don't. The vast majority of my fires have been in homes that were 1950s and later. I don't do a lot of older construction, mostly newer. So there's a lot surrounding that conversation. But just like right now with the 1 3/4, I think we can dominate with 2 lines a lot more than we can dominate with one. That's a debate for another time. But 3 to 4 rooms of fire. So I don't know what that would equate to in square footage, but being that you can control on approach and extinguish as you go, I would feel comfortable with that. And I'm looking at the different water usage in residential study like graphs that I pulled. I think I sent it to you, Dave. That's in that. It's just something to consider. That's in that revision document that I'm doing. The maximum amount of fire suppression water flowed was 257 gallons on I think the most water they flowed on one of these studies. That I don't know the conditions of that, but that has to be looked at and go, well, okay, in light of that, what did they face, and how that was the equivalent of how much water they flowed en route to. So I don't know that there's a direct answer, but I would feel comfortable at 130 personally going in. And another thing that's kind of kept me, and maybe this is a false sense of security, is it's been said without hose failure, I don't know of a documented line of duty death on the end of a working hose line where they're working a room, not a burn through, an overrunning of a volume on a hose line. Unless you guys could tell me when that happened, I'm not aware of it. So in light of that, I have an extraordinary confidence in the 160 flow, and taking a few gallons away from me, I don't see it as much of a risk to your standard run-of-the-mill house fire. So to me, do you need a bunch of different lines? No, I think you can get away with 1.5 inches and 2 1/4. It's what I use now. 2.5, 260, which is now a dominant discussion of pulling that down to 240, right? A 240 flow hand line on a 2.5. And for me, that would be probably relegated to either defensive posture or commercial attack with large volumes of fire. And this is just my opinion. If we find ourselves working a commercial occupancy with a 2 1/4 greater than 15 to 20 feet deep on an offensive attack on a commercial, you got to be questioning, well, what's the gain? What's the gain here with that volume? Something compelled us to flow that volume, so you have to question the risk benefit of going interior. And I know that sounds weak, and I know a lot of people would bust my chops over that, but I just think there's got to be a baseline of decision making there. And I'm kind of scattered all over the place, but I think the 1.5 inch line at a 130 flow is plenty. That's where I stand right now. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of risk with it, but I say that somewhat ignorantly, right? I'm going on an opinion. I'm going on what I think as an end user would be most advantageous. And I think it's I think it's worth the risk, if you will, to flow 130 in this particular case.
Well, I would, let's say you have 1.5 inches and you have a lower flow, sub 150. What's your next line? choice? So you have a small, medium, and large, or do you just go from small to large? Or what is it? Like, how much gallonage in between models are you going to have? Should there be an intermediate flow somewhere along the line? Because you mentioned basically a 110-gallon difference in your example. So that's a
Hmm.
lot of empty space, so to speak. Um, and there's issues with having three lines that are, because then you got small, medium, and large. One could possibly become the default constant use line that you really didn't want to end up in that situation, but people
Hmm.
aren't quite sure what to pull, so they pull the middle one. Um,
Right.
what's the tipping point for a 130 to 200 plus? What situation are you going to look at? Now, one of the things that happens is, especially let's just say commercial fires, larger open space fires, is that people get tricked into what conditions are when they pull up.
Hmm.
Oh, we only have a little
Hmm.
bit of smoke showing. Okay, then they open up the door, or try and open up, so to speak, and now conditions are changing and changing. The fire's in the back, it's cluttered, whatever. Now you brought a small line with you, and you don't really know what the space is. It's high volume
Yep.
space, and you don't have much reach, and the penetration power might not be that great either. I don't know, but the point is, you could find yourself exiting that place if you're outgunned. So that's all I would worry about. I think it's fine for residential. I don't have an issue if you had a multi-room fire. I think it'd be all right. Um, Certainly. I mean, people have done it. People are doing it. So
Hmm.
it's not like this is like totally abstract. People are actually doing this. We're talking about it in the abstract because we didn't do it.
Right.
Uh, you know,
Yeah.
but maybe
Sure.
it's best that way because we're not jaded by what some people think is success. One thing the UL reports have taught us is that what you think is going on may not be exactly what is going on. So, you know,
True. Very true. Well, that the breakover and when to pull big lines and small lines, and I think I know where you're going, Dave, with the multiple choices. No, I think we need to keep it simple. Like I don't think we need to complicate it. I wouldn't advocate an inch and three quarter and then an inch and a half and then I'm gonna get a booster reel and then no, the booster reel, there was such a hard move away from the booster reel, not to advocate it, but because it was being pulled on the occupancies you're talking about, Ray, or on situations where people couldn't make that determination. Maybe it was too many choices in the moment for departments, or maybe it was just sheer laziness because it was easy to put up and easy to deploy, because it's on a reel and it was rigid, you know. But I think policies and SOGs help direct when to pull larger lines, where that breakover point is. Some places are better than others at it. For where I currently work and where I came from before, it doesn't matter what you see at the door of a commercial, you're putting a two and a quarter. Or in Fort Walton, where I was at, in that case, a 2-inch, 260 line on the ground. Just because of what you said, Ray, we don't want to get caught in that discovery of something going on and being undergunned. But for everything residential, it was the inch and three quarter, and I would say the same on the inch and a half. You know, um, but like you said, there is a greater gallonage disparity. From the that 260 flow down to 130 as opposed to approximately 100 gallons differential right now on the big and the small line. But right now we have big and small lines. It's one choice typically, right? For most. I don't know. How does DC and Detroit? Do they have options? I've never even looked at their rigs. I couldn't tell you.
I know that they have both. I don't know the exact sizes. I know DC was evaluating Super 2. I don't know whether or not they pulled the trigger on that. So I think I know Detroit has 2.5. So I know Montgomery County's running an inch and a half right now. They've got, I think, 2.5. So I think every fire department has, a small. I like to say small, medium, and large. With the large being, it gets a little bit. Could be confusing where it's more like portable streams and deck guns, through the use of
Yeah.
larger lines like 3-inch.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, yeah, I think everyone has that. I was just curious. And again, there is no right or wrong answer, the way that you're looking at this and what's in your head, just trying to get in there and see what your thoughts were. So thanks for letting us pepper you with some on the spot questions that we haven't had a chance to necessarily talk about in person.
Well, I appreciate that I don't get totally destroyed because I expect that on social media when
Yeah.
the article comes out, and then maybe a subsequent more educated follow up. You know, that just presents a thought provoking piece. That's the whole intent. I just want people to think about it. And it's good to question things sometimes. Even though change may not come out of that questioning process, we'll all get a little bit more educated in the journey. And I feel like that's been my journey over the last few years. And especially, it's really ramped up in the last 2 years. I think, Dave, me and you were kind of talking about this before we got started on our knowledge of what the water is doing in the compartment.
Hmm.
That's been huge. I've loved that, like personally, because it allows me to communicate my position now in training confidently. Like, hey, listen, man, this isn't. We're not talking opinions. You know, like be confident in the tools that you have in your hand, and then organizations that don't know, you need to know. Like you said, Dave, you need to know what you're flowing. It's really important.
Love that. I do think that really wraps up a lot too, ties pretty well everything back in together. And just me personally, I mean, I know my knowledge of this stuff when it comes to the hose aspect and everything is a fraction of some of the things that we're talking about here tonight. But it's, we talked about it earlier, it's not a one size fit all. The fire service is never going to be that way. But DJ, like you said, just getting the conversation started, getting fire departments or firefighters to think about the options, the technology, the resources that they have out there for them.
Mm-hmm. Lots.
So I want to wrap up with a little bit, just kind of passing the ball around like we did this morning, or I say this morning, Lord, it's when we started the podcast, just to kind of let everybody know where they can get in touch with and anything you want to put out there. DJ, I know you've already mentioned your article coming out next month, so uh, definitely excited for that one. Is there anything else you got going on you want to pass along to everybody, or where they can find you at before we head out?
Sure. My email contact is 850firemen at gmail. If you want to know anything, I'm an open book on whatever I do, whatever I have. Otherwise, Facebook's kind of only social media. Twitter, I do a little bit of that. But Facebook, it just seems to be the platform I use mostly to communicate with other people in the business. David Stone, just look me up, DJ, on that platform. Other than that, there's two other places I'm traveling. I'm pretty excited to go share. I do a program about some positive outcomes on BES and search. And I'm going to the PNW conference in October, which I'm pretty pumped about that. I think it's probably my favorite part of the country. I'm excited to go back there and hang out with my wife and then a bunch of firemen up there and share my story. And then small town conference in Louisiana, Hammond, Louisiana. Small town, job town, I think it is. That is Sam that helps out Corley in his podcast, training division chief there. That's a conference that he does. And we're going over there the week after I get back. So mid October for the Northwest, and then 1 week after that, I go to Louisiana. So if you're in any of those areas, man, come out. The one in Louisiana, I'm doing differently. I'm doing a new class that I'm working on about training, and it's the effect of the company officer on that, kind of a best practices things. But really, that's it. Other than doing stuff on my job and just trying to get better at my job as training chief currently.
Awesome. Ray, what about you? I know we've talked about, you've mentioned it in some other podcasts here lately, and you mentioned it to me as well about your new book that's coming out. So I know
Yeah,
you've got
well, it's
some
not
stuff
out
you're
yet.
looking forward to.
It's not out yet, but I will be having a book come out. Yeah, it's a bit of a memoir, but it's also very much related to my speech at FDIC and just different values of firefighters and exploring that. But this weekend, I'm going to be doing a new class called the Engine Crew Clinic. It's a hybrid class of lectures on the nozzle position, backup position, and door position, and an officer lecture as well for those who want to learn about being a company officer. And then we're going to do a hands-on portion that covers those skill sets, and it's very limited. It's under 30 people can be in the hands-on, but it's very intimate, and Dave's going to be part of it, and it's just going to be a great opportunity. And I think what I would hope for it is that crews would see the value in this, because it will improve your teamwork, and that's really what matters on the fireground is teamwork. And I'm going to give a keynote at a conference in Nevada called the Fire Show West, but it won't be a repeat of my FDIC speech.
Looking forward to the one in North Carolina coming up this weekend.
Yeah, that's this weekend coming up
Yep.
next week. Yeah,
I've
that's
got
right.
about so it's not as far from my house to there, but I'm getting off shift that morning. Actually, whenever Alex and I talked about it, he thought that I was going to be there a lot earlier than what I actually am on Friday because I've got about a 7-hour drive to get there from the time I get off shift. So
No, you
I'll see
better
y'all
wait for the
some.
next one.
I'm coming over, but I'll see y'all sometime Friday afternoon more than likely.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, that's okay. But the class is Saturday.
Yeah.
So you'll be
Dave, what you got going on coming up? You want to let people know about?
Yeah, I got a bunch, but before I do that, I just wanted to kind of wrap up and say, find folks that you can have these kinds of thought-provoking conversations with. Man, it's awesome. I have the opportunity to talk to these guys on a regular basis, and you just throw ideas against the wall. Sometimes you come up with something, and sometimes you just had a great conversation, and it doesn't go anywhere. But I think that that's super important. Surround yourself with those kinds of folks, and you'll be super successful here on the job. I'll be at 2 conferences coming up. I guess between now and the first part of the year, I'm going to be at Joey D doing a hands-on class with Billy Leto from Elkhart Brass. We're doing an extended and vertical handline stretch class, 4 hours, going over considerations and showing some different things, both inside and outside. And I'm doing a class with Ray and Jack Ayers and Cameron Gangbin at the Long Live the Engine conference in Santa Monica in January. So for anybody who's in a cold weather climate, you want to go out to the Pacific Coast and nerd out on some engine stuff, come hang with us. It's going to be a 8-hour hybrid program. So again, for like 3 hours inside and 5 hours outside, we're going to be looking at all different types of interior and exterior vertical stretches, as well as engine company emergencies and handline failures. So we're pretty excited for that program. I got some other stuff, but I guess transitioning to the next piece, I always post those on my social media. So if someone wants to get a hold of me, you can hit me up like on Instagram, at the Hose Nerd. I'm on Facebook, David Quick. You can email me. The number's 603 and then fireserviceconsulting@gmail.com. I'm always happy to nerd out with anybody. So hopefully folks got something out of it and they have any follow-up questions, hit us up. We're more than happy to chat with you.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, first of all, I want to thank all 3 of you for taking time out of your evening to come here and have the conversation. I know there's a lot of passion behind every camera that I'm sitting here looking at right now, and it's a topic that all of you are well familiar with and aren't scared to put your names and your face out there attached along with it. So I appreciate that because that's not something that everybody's willing to do. Kind of like Dave said, having those conversations that not only challenge other people's way of thinking, but challenging the way that you think yourselves is the only way that we grow as firemen or grow as men or anything that we do in our lives. So definitely want to thank you all for taking the time out to come do it here on the TCF platform, especially for it to be the reboot. Like I said, there's a lot of first for me here tonight with the platform itself. So hopefully it'll be on for good this time around, and we can keep these kind of conversations rolling and hopefully see all of y'all on the show again at some point. So everybody, you heard them, where you can find them at, conference, social media wise, what they've got going on. So make sure you get out there. Challenge yourselves as well, just like we just got done talking about. Put yourselves in these kinds of conversations that make you grow as a person and as a fireman. It's the best job in the world. And I know I spent a lot of years kind of neglecting that mindset of it myself. And once I really found it, it changed everything for me. So it's something I challenge if you're struggling with it to get out there and do it.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
man.
Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah.